Good morning, folks. Let's kick off the show with a political disclaimer first this week. The following content is approved by Larry Linton for TN12, candidate for the GOP nomination for Tennessee House of Representatives, District 12. Larry Linton, Treasurer. Now for a bit of an update of the happenings this past week. If you follow the show closely, you will know that today I'm returning home after wrapping up my final week of consulting down in Mississippi. I actually spent a couple of days in Louisiana this time as well, close to Delhi with a crew over that way. The temperatures this past week were still brutal, with a heat index in the triple digits every day. By the time I wrapped up at each location, I was drenched in sweat. But it is well worth it watching these leaders grow in their application of the tools I and my fellow coaches have been training them on. As with all organizations, there are differences in the levels of performance and understanding. But with these folks down here in Mississippi and Louisiana, those differences are negligible at best. The client's senior level leadership conveyed to me that they are extremely pleased with the results, and each of my fellow coaches share in that pleasure as well. All in all, it was a very productive 3-week engagement, but I am so looking forward to returning home to my bride. As has been the case for quite a few episodes lately, this one is released while I am, in fact, traveling. It should be hitting the quote unquote airwaves while I'm in an airport and waiting to board the first leg of my return flight home. Once I touch down in East Tennessee, though, there won't be any time to take a break or take a knee. Some of my supporters have been doing some admirable work hitting the phones and knocking on doors for me, but know that I get to do that between now and Election Day. Oh, and I get to have to get through another hand surgery, some physical therapy, on top of sharing the household chores with my bride. She has dealt with a lot of adversity, more than normal, during the time I was away from home this time. I won't bore you or maybe excite you with the details. Suffice it to say, though, her experience as a Navy wife and mother prepared her well for the trials and tribulations this go around. Plumbing issues again, along with some vehicle issues, throw in some pet sitting for a few days, and not your average ordinary pets. 3 Australian Shepherds, along with our own Aussie. That is a lot to handle by yourself. If you know anything about the breed, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty Leadership and Lies podcast, where I will discuss the lies our governments or people in government or seeking government office, and no matter the level, the lies they tell us to ensure they stay at the reins of power and control over the lives of the citizens. Those lies, they travel around the state, country, and world fast, infinitely faster than the truth. And why is that important to the communists and the establishment Republicans? So let's take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks, and get on with the show. Welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, we will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. Your host on this program is Larry Linton, a 30-year veteran of the United States Navy who also runs his own leadership consulting company. He is also a candidate for the Republican Party's nomination to represent Tennessee's House District 12, which includes Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Pittman Center, Weirs Valley, Seymour, and parts of Sevierville, and most of Sevier County. So here is your host, Larry Linton. Good morning, folks. While I may still be in Mississippi right now, it is only because I'm either at the airport waiting to board my flight, or I'm probably at 30,000 feet over the state on my way home. As I stated in the introduction, I am so looking forward to the many challenges that I will encounter as soon as I touch down in Knoxville and start making my way home to Sevierville this morning. My lovely bride had to deal with some tremendous adversity during the 3 weeks I was gone this time. More stuff than I mentioned in the introduction. When I think about the woman who chose to trust me and ride this wild ride with me on this temporary home, there are a few verses from scripture that really describe this woman. The first one is Proverbs chapter 31, verse 10, which states, "A wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies." Denise's strong and noble character are invaluable to me. I would not be who I am and not be able to do what I do without her steadfast support. The other bit of scripture that accurately describes the jewel in my life also comes from the book of Proverbs, sticking with chapter 31, but verse 17 this time, which states, "She sets about her work vigorously, her arms are strong for her tasks." It isn't just her arms that are strong. In addition to her character that I already mentioned, it is her heart that is strong too. She is a fiercely devoted wife and mother, the ultimate mama bear, if you will. I could go on, but she's not very fond of me talking about her on this program, in addition to not being out front in my campaign. But rest assured, when I tell you that, as I just said, that I could not do what I do, nor be the husband and man that I am right now, without the love and support of this daughter of the king. You can take that straight to the bank. Now, before I get too emotional and start blubbering as I think about all the things this woman does for our family, I have to get into this week's topic of lies. I'm sure that many of you have heard the phrase that a lie travels around the earth faster than the truth can even get its pants on in the morning, right? This is especially true in the political arena, and it is a fact that communists and establishment Republicans rely upon. We'll talk about a couple of them in this week's show. One of the reasons we'll discuss is part of the reason for wearing this shirt this episode. I'm proud to be a life member of the Tennessee Firearms Association, or TFA. The executive director of the TFA, Mr. John Harris, has been a guest of this program a few times over the past few years. He and the rest of his team at the TFA, they are the true freedom fighters in our nation right now. Sadly, there are not a lot of Tennesseans that know who and what the TFA is. Be sure and visit their website. See the banner below. It's TennesseeFirearms.com. Please go check them out. They occupy the space of what is often referred to, quite inappropriately, as I will discuss, they occupy the space of gun rights here in Tennessee. Not only that, but they are also involved in a lot of liberty defense across the nation. But first, let me tell you why I think the label or term gun rights is inappropriate. In fact, I believe it is a lie perpetuated by the communists, enabled by the establishment, and believed to be true by many people on what can be described or referred to as the right or conservative side of the political spectrum. Just think about the actual words in that phrase, gun rights. While it might imply, quite correctly, that the citizens of this great republic have a right to own a gun or firearm, as guaranteed under the Second Amendment, does not tell the whole story. And in doing so, it allows that particular constitutionally protected right to be assaulted because the terminology allows opponents to attack a particular instrument only, the gun. If the enemies of freedom and liberty can shift the focus away from the underlying reality of that fundamental human right and instead focus on the instrument, it shifts their fight to what has been quite a successful campaign against the instrument. But what is the basic fundamental human right they are intent on shifting the focus away from? What, ladies and gentlemen, is the most basic of civil rights that we have? A lot of people would say our most basic civil rights are captured in the First Amendment: the right of free speech, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, freedom to petition the government that we, the people, formed in order to secure our liberty. Now, don't get me wrong here, folks. Those are some very important fundamental human rights, but they are undergirded by the most basics of civil rights in a free society. Those freedoms or civil rights cannot be exercised if you do not have the ability to defend yourself. To defend yourself from criminals, but more importantly, to defend yourself from tyrants and tyranny that could erase the other civil rights we enjoy in our republic. Freedom of speech. Could you freely say what you wanted to if you lived in a society where tyranny flourishes, where you didn't have the ability to defend yourself? Well, ask the survivors of the Soviet Union's tyrannical communist regime if they could speak freely in that society, or the survivors of Hitler's Germany. They could speak to this as well. Ask the people that have escaped from tyranny in North Korea, China, Cuba, and scores of other places if they could speak freely while living there. What prevented them from doing so? Of course, the tyrants in power that removed their ability, the ability of the people to defend themselves. That did that. The same thing could be applied to the freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, everything listed in the First Amendment that makes up the Bill of Rights in our national Constitution. None of those basic civil rights would exist if you weren't able to protect or you weren't able to execute or exercise the absolute most basic civil right, the right of self-defense. That is what the Second Amendment, which in all honesty should have been the first, that is what the Second Amendment should be referred to as. The right to keep and bear arms is the civil right of self-defense or self-protection. We all have allowed the commies and establishment Republicans to lie by omission, about what the Second Amendment actually means by letting them get away with calling it gun rights. The people over at Tennessee Firearms Association work to ensure the most basic of civil rights in our constitutional republic. It is protected from those that would seek to label it as something other than that so that we can protect ourselves from government abuses of our other civil rights. They are Tennessee's only no compromise gun organization. And like I said, I am proud to be a life member of just such an organization. Another reason I'm sporting this shirt this week is this. TFA's Legislative Action Committee, TFALAC, which is a Tennessee-based state political action committee. Well, TFALAC works to persuade legislators and government leaders to protect your right to keep and bear arms, your right to self-defense. TFALAC is separate but affiliated with the TFA. It's registered as a political action committee in Tennessee and has been so since approximately 1996. In a media announcement on the 18th of June, the organization, TFALAC, listed a group of 18 Tennessee House of Representatives, many of them incumbents, but 18 candidates for the House of Representatives that they made financial contributions to for purpose of state legislative primary races. On that list was none other than yours truly, which of course is quite humbling, and I'm deeply honored by their support. But if my name was on the list that this organization dedicated to the preservation of the most basic of civil rights provided, it means that my main opponent is not, let me repeat, not supported by this group. So when I discussed the topic of endorsements quite a few weeks ago, some matter and some don't. Well, scratch that. All endorsements matter, but look at the people or organizations that are providing the endorsement and what they value. For instance, when an organization that believes in government involvement in the free market endorses a candidate, just what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that that candidate, if he gets into office, that candidate will promote or work on initiatives that most closely align with what the endorsement people value. And in the case of what I just mentioned, it means more government involvement in the free market. But what about an organization or person that values the protection of civil rights? If just such an organization endorses or supports a candidate in an election cycle, they expect that the candidate will promote or work on initiatives that strengthen constitutional protections of the people's civil rights or the people's liberty. So far in this race, I've received the support or endorsement of people and organizations that do that very thing. The Organization of Restore Liberty and their Restore Liberty Tennessee chapter, they support my candidacy because they want to return to the foundational principles of a constitutional republic that our founding fathers passed down to us. When the conservative constitutional champion of the Tennessee Senate announced her support of me and my campaign, it is because she recognizes that I will put in the work not only to protect and defend the liberty of my fellow Tennesseans, but that I will also follow my oath to do that very same thing. Can the same be said of endorsements by the outgoing incumbent for Tennessee House District 12? Did he work to protect the liberty of the people that live here in this district consistently? Or did he also engage in doing the bidding of lobbyists and special interests, along with the bidding of the establishment Republicans in Nashville? Oh, and don't forget the bidding of the good old boy network here in Sevier County as well. I think you all know the answers to those questions, don't you? Well, it seems that I'm up against a break, but we'll be right back, so don't go anywhere. Something to consider in the meantime, though. Would you like freedom, or would you like to live under the yoke of corporate and good old boy governance? It's up to you. See you on the other side of the break, ladies and gentlemen. And we're back. Before I move on and getting back to the end of my last segment, it reminded me of something funny that happened. It wasn't funny at first, but a bit perplexing. My wife and I had a good laugh about it, as well as some of my supporters that are out there in Sevier County that I shared this information with. I believe we talked a bit about the schedule I keep while I'm on the road for my consulting gig. Early to bed and early to rise is the best way to describe it. I'm usually done for the evening and in bed by about 8 p.m. every day while I'm away from home. That is because I wake up each morning around 2:30 or 2:45 a.m., especially if I have to be at a location by 6:30 a.m. that will take me anywhere between 90 minutes to 2 hours to drive to. Plus, I have to get in my treadmill exercise. I have to get it done in the mornings because I often lack the motivation to do anything but relax once I get back to my hotel room after spending a day out in the elements with these men in the oil field. Anyway, that's my routine. Well, one day last week, I wake up to a list of missed calls on my phone. Oh, another thing I do with my phone is that I put on a do not disturb schedule during these evenings when I am in these hotel rooms. What that does is turn off all notifications on my phone, except from those that are on my favorites list, which is, of course, my wife, my daughter, my mother, and my two brothers. My phone will always allow notifications to come in from those numbers, even when do not disturb is turned on. Now, what does this have to do with the lies, you may be asking? Well, let's finish. So anyway, last week I woke up to a missed call from none other than Mr. Dale Carr. The call happened at 8:47 p.m. on Sunday evening, 8:47 p.m. my time. So keep in mind, that means it was made at 9:47 p.m. Eastern time, which is the time zone that Sevier County's in. So nearly 10 p.m. local time Sevier, the call was made. So that was kind of perplexing, right? Why would he be calling me? He has already came out and endorsed his and the Sevier County Good Old Boys handpicked successor in this race. And I don't think we've got anything more to discuss. So I put the matter aside that Monday morning because I got right into my routine. It was too early when I saw that notification to politely call or text him back and ask him what he wanted. I just went on with my normal activities and didn't think about it for a while. In fact, I didn't get around to thinking about it until the next day, on Tuesday. Right after a couple of early morning engagements with the clients, I checked my phone for another missed call that happened that morning. That's when I was reminded about the missed call from Dale. So I sent him a text stating that, hey, I noticed a missed call from you. And then I asked him if there was anything I could help him with. Now, here is where I believe the lie came into play. He responded a few minutes later with a text that stated it was probably just a pocket call, otherwise known as a butt dial. That seems weird, right? Like many of you have had my fair share of butt dials or pocket calls since the advent of the smartphone. What do a vast majority of them all have in common? Well, almost all of them. Well, those butt dials are usually to people that, option A, you recently contacted, so they are at the top of your recent list, either text or phone calls. Or there's option B, somebody on the top of a favorites list. We all know that option B is completely out of consideration, right? I'm not on Dale Carr's or anybody in the Sevier County Good Old Boy Network's favorites list on their phones. I mean, I'm probably on one of their lists, but it's most assuredly isn't on favorites. So option B is completely off the table, as I said. Now I can tell you that option A cannot be considered either. The last time I had communicated with Dale Carr was via text, and that was back in January of this year when I had heard that he had announced his retirement. I was definitely not on any recents list for his phone, if you know what I mean. So now that we have eliminated options A and options B, what does that leave us with? Factually, it only leaves us with supposition, but it definitely rules out a pocket call, as Dale would want me and now you to believe. This is just another, hey, pull my leg, it plays jingle bells situation. In other words, a lie. Oh, and I received word from one of my supporters that went to the other candidates meet and greet event last week and overheard him telling a person in attendance what can only also be called out a flat out lie. He explained away his, in my opinion, his cowardly behavior of not showing up to the candidate forum hosted by Convention of States as, now get this, he stated he was simply unavailable for the event. Let me ask you a question, folks. If you're invited to an event, any type of event, it doesn't have to be a political one, but if you are invited to an event, do you respond? Give the host an RSVP, if you will. Of course you do. Most people do. What does it mean when you ignore the invitation? What does that tell the host? Well, if it's a single invitation that goes unanswered, you could chalk it up to the person being invited, that is being invited, not seeing the invitation or not receiving it. 2 or 3 or 5 invitations without a response. That should cause the host to have a reasonable suspicion that the invitation is being ignored. If somebody being invited to an event that is somewhat important to their career, or as in this situation, their campaign, a response of yes, no, or even maybe is very appropriate. And if you are unavailable, legitimately unavailable, telling the event host that would be fine, right? I believe that I'm correct in my reasoning there, don't you? Now there's this to consider. The event host that the other candidate skipped out on and is now telling people he was unavailable for. Well, the event host sent him 40, yes, that is 40 invitations, all of which were completely ignored. 1, 2, or maybe even 3 invitations that are not responded to can be chalked up to being overcome by events in a busy person's life. 40 invitations that were completely ignored are just that, completely ignored. We could put the ignoring 40 invitations to participate in the event alongside his refusal to come out to the empowered severe candidate event, where, by the way, he wanted the questions in advance, and also tie those 2 refusals alongside the information that I received from his longtime friend that Mr. Atchley has been advised not to participate in these events. Knowing all of that, and now consider what candidate and long-term county commissioner told a voter, that was an outright lie. If he is willing to lie about the small things, folks, you know he will lie about the big things. I'm sure that this isn't the first time he told that lie, but that lie traveled around the world of his supporters faster than this truth will. Lies do that because they are quite often the first thing out of the commies and the establishment Republicans' mouths. And most people are too polite to call them out on it in public, which is one of the many reasons our country, our county, our state, they are all in the mess that we are in. Also overheard in that conversation was actually telling this voter that his 3 main issues were roads, education, and public safety. Why didn't he do anything about those things during his current 20 plus year stint on the county commission, which has a much more direct impact on them than the state does? We've already discussed education and roads in a previous episode. What about this public safety, though? That's concerning to me, because that is a favorite term of the communists, isn't it? Doubt me on this? What was the reason that local, state, and national government used to shut down businesses, close schools, isolate loved ones in nursing homes, family members in hospitals, and required citizens to inject an experimental concoction that required the government to redefine the word vaccine? Yep, that was all done for public safety, folks. If elected, how much more of our sweat equity with this Sevier County GOP or good old boy network, establishment Republican, How much would he like for us to fork over to the government so that they can abuse the citizens in the future? Speaking of squeezing the citizens for their sweat equity, another tidbit of information came my way this past week when talking with a conservative citizen advocacy group. The organization is called Beacon Impact. You can check out the website. It's beaconimpact.org. On their webpage, you can read that their mission is to turn the ideas of the Beacon Center of Tennessee into action through advocacy. The Beacon Center empowers Tennesseans to reclaim and protect their freedoms so that they can freely pursue their version of the American dream. Anyway, last week I had a pretty good discussion with one of the members of the Beacon Impact, where we talked about their mission, their primary focus areas, and its general dealings with the Tennessee General Assembly. The fellow I was talking to discussed his interactions with the House's Property and Planning Committee, as well as the House's Local Government Committee. Both committees just happen to be chaired by the retiring Representative Dale Carr. That isn't the interesting bit at all, though. The descriptions of his interactions with Dale Carr, they just check with chart. You can imagine trying to get an elected official to follow their oath and move along liberty-protecting legislation, but that representative has different marching orders from the establishment Republicans in the General Assembly. Anyway, the interesting tidbit is how any issue that deals with Sevier County, how it is handled in the General Assembly. It is handled the way that the lobbyists want it to be handled. Would you all like to know who is paying for those lobbyists? The short answer is that you and I and every other resident of the county, we are paying for them, because many of the lobbyists around issues dealing with Sevier County are taxpayer-funded lobbyists. How do you like them apples, folks? So if the residents want to know why it is so hard to get things accomplished in the General Assembly that would improve things such as roads, education, and quote unquote public safety, or what about affordable housing? Look no further than the county commission spending tax dollars to pay lobbyists to influence the General Assembly to keep the status quo right here in Sevier County. All the while telling the residents that that is a state issue and not a local issue. That is who and what you will be electing and opting for more of if you support the good old boy, establishment Republican, who ducks public appearances with his opposition and blatantly lies to voters' faces. Now, following a short break, we will close out this week's show with wisdom from God's word and my closing thoughts. A bit of a history lesson in the closing segment, folks. All of us should know that our nation was founded upon the principles of individual liberty and small government. The very county that I live in, Sevier County, was named after our state's first governor and a man who literally mortgaged everything he owned to provide funding for a militia to fight against the British, John Sevier. Governor Sevier would be saddened to see the situation in the government of the county that bears his name today. How it has turned into a version of the government he fought a war against to obtain freedom for him and his fellow countrymen. I have to say that I too was saddened to learn that this last bit of information I passed along to you about Sevier County's taxpayer-funded lobbyists. Much like the national government has robbed Americans of their sweat equity and then turns it around and uses it for purposes that do not match the will of the people, the same thing is happening right here in our beautiful corner of the world. Win or lose this election is my sincere hope that the residents here in the county begin to take action against the corrupt purposes of the elected members in our county government that do not seek to do the will of the people, but instead work hard to make their own lives comfortable and to serve their own selfish needs. This is what happens when you elect people that are so comfortable with lying and knowing that their lies will always travel faster than the truth. The residents of Tennessee House District 12, which is made up of Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Weirs Valley, Pittman Center, Seymour, and parts of Sevierville, These residents could not have a more of a stark difference between candidates during this upcoming primary election. On the one hand, you have the career politician who has been in elected office for more than 2 decades, who's incapable of telling the truth, and he's fearful of facing difficult questions. The candidate who has also been using the residents' tax dollars to pay for lobbyists in the General Assembly that work to ensure that the status quo here in Sevier County is maintained, where the Good Old Boy Network maintains their comfortable lifestyle and the residents deal with the terrible roads and have a hard time finding affordable housing. A candidate that has expanded the regulatory role of the government by requiring fees for small business owners to pay for a new level of bureaucracy. A candidate that is comfortable telling lies and avoid situations where they'll be asked questions that they know they cannot answer and still maintain the support of the voters that he has fooled. Then, on the other hand, you have the candidate that is endorsed by liberty-loving, liberty-defending organizations, as well as liberty-loving people. Somebody who has dedicated 30 years of their life in defense of the Constitution, and somebody who knows and has demonstrated how to show fealty to that same wonderful document. A candidate, while not always polite, is always truthful. Speaking of the campaign specifically here, I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to the many volunteers out there in the county that are helping me out. You all know who you are, so I won't specifically mention you by name, but the people that are out helping with signs, phone calls, and knocking on doors. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You are all one of the many reasons why I am doing this. Each of you has recognized that things need to change for the residents of Sevier County, and that the Good Old Boy Establishment Network, that they have been at the helm for far too long now, and all to the detriment of our county. So once again, thank you all for doing what you do. Let's keep it going. And we can see a victory on election day in spite of how much money the establishment Good Old Boy Network raises. The truth will win the day. Now, before we close out this week, I also want to thank all the loyal followers and new listeners to the show. This work, just like my leadership consulting, it's a labor of love. I've said that from the beginning. It is taking a stand in the arena in defense of liberty and the founding principles of our nation. When I win this election, rest assured this platform will not go away. It will be a great tool in being the transparent elected official that I'm supposed to be. Now, some of the other folks in Nashville will not like how transparent I will be, but that is something for them to worry about. Without transparency, we cannot truly have a representative republic. Now, for this week's wisdom from God's word, it comes to us from the book of Psalms, chapter 37, verse 21. The wicked borrows, but does not pay back, but the righteous is generous and gives. Our local government has borrowed, well, not really borrowed, but really coerced our money to use against us. A righteous candidate would ensure that the residents put into the state's revenue stream would truly be used to benefit the entire county, not just the good old boys, the wicked. Folks, I'm humbly asking you all to take a stand in the arena with me this election cycle. Stand up for what is right and put a stop to the lying political or establishment class. Ensure you vote in this upcoming primary. Make a plan now. Bring 10 people to the polls with you. Email 10 of your family members or friends and neighbors and coworkers. Then on election day or when early voting starts, send 10 text messages to remind people to vote. Together, we can do this. Together, by taking a stand in the arena, we can win. Until next week, reveille, it's time to wake up.